start the final panel of the day. Can everybody please take your seats, and anybody who's enjoying food, can you please, be a little bit quiet because we're going to start an amazing panel. Please take your seats. Our final panel of the day gathers some of the most exciting young designers and architects, truly the most exciting young designers and architects, together in conversation with one of the design visionaries of today, Paola Antonelli, who is Senior Curator of Design at the Museum of Modern Art. So the panelists we have today, we have Junfeng Wang, who's here from Shanghai, right there. Who's come specially for this event, by the way. And we also have Nianlai Zhong, who practices both in New York and in Shanghai. We have Juan, who's a professor based in Hong Kong and also an architect. We have Yichen, who works in New York and all over China. And we have finally Ruoyi, who's a creative entrepreneur who's bringing cutting-edge Chinese design to New York. So this is going to be an amazing panel. Over to you, Paola.
It's a great pleasure to see you all here this afternoon for this great festival. And when Dinda invited me to speak today and to be a moderator of this panel, I immediately say yes, not only because I really, really love Dinda and I love this institution, but because I truly wanted to meet our 5 panelists here. They represent very different ways to design, and they are Chinese, that's what they have in common, but also they speak to the facets of Chinese design. I mean, China is a pretty big country, and design is a pretty big discipline. There are so many ways, both in China and in the world of design, to apply one's expertise. And I'm really so happy to be able to present to you this incredible spectrum of design approaches. And what will happen today, we have about 40 minutes, which we will extend because you'll see we won't be able to stay in those 40 minutes, but you will not have one boring moment or down moment. Every single one will present some of their work for about 4 minutes, then I will ask a question, then at the end of it all, we'll open up to find some threads that are common to all of them. So I would like to start today. The first presentation will be actually Nianlai, and then we will move on. So Nianlai, we can start with the slides, please. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Paola. This is Nianlai from New Practice Studio. We are an interdisciplinary design studio based in New York and Shanghai. What we are interested in doing is really to question some of the cliches or preconceived ideas about space and program and typology that are prevalent in the contemporary society. Today I'm just going to quickly use 2 projects to illustrate what we do. The first is a restaurant project in New York. When we were approached to design a space for rice noodle joints in New York, we were really fascinated about this scene of how the local people would enjoy this type of food. The noodles coming from Hunan province in China, but in Hunan, the local people, they just enjoy this noodle while sitting on a stool, slurping the noodles with complete strangers in the open street, like really casually in very social environments. So we're very much interested in how we could transform this experience into a more contemporary environment. And this is what we ultimately achieved in East Village. As you can see here, in a very tunnel-like space, we organize a row of communal tables, sort of recreating this social dining experience where people can enjoy the food with strangers. And also the idea of how to engage with the streets and the neighborhood is very important for us. So we sort of push the communal table directly to the streets, touching the single panel of glass. So there's a direct relationship, a dialogue established between the interior and exterior. So the shop becomes a place to look into and to look out from. I welcome all of you to go to the restaurants to test the food there. Its village is really close. And I also prepared a little guidebook of some of the restaurant projects we did in New York. It's on the reception desk. Everyone can have a look or take it from home. Another project we are working in China is actually in the context of a water town, where we were really struck by how the local residences are built floating above the waterways, and how the local people would access different parts of the town by constantly crossing the bridges. So in this project, the main concept is really to challenge the cliche organization of a hotel where you have a single corridor and you have guest rooms on both sides. And by detaching the corridor from the guest rooms, we are able to create this central void where you have the bridges connecting the guest rooms and the public circulation. So in a sense, what we were trying to do is really creating this almost a ceremonial experience where the guests can access their rooms. The project is currently under construction and hopefully to be opened next year. And these are some examples of what we do, and we'd like to transform stereotypes into prototypes. Thank you.
Thank you, Nianlai. This is really so interesting because it's very true that there are new prototypes that become stereotypes and also new typologies. We're using a lot of architectural language here, you have to forgive us, but new typologies of living that are completely unknown to the Western world. For instance, there was an exhibition last year, the Biennial of Architecture in Venice, that was all about young people's dwellings in big towns in China. This kind of freedom to experiment with new types of living, eating, and hoteling or hospitality is really incredible. How do you find the capacity of experimenting in China versus the capacity of experimenting here in the United States?
I think, culturally speaking, creativity and originality is still very much encouraged in the US, in a way much more so than in China. But that doesn't mean that there is no spark of creativity coming out from China. Quite the contrary, there is.
Quite the contrary, exactly.
I think part of the reason is actually because of this economics and the intensity of consumerism that is currently happening in China, that creativity and originality is becoming a necessity for the clients to actually attract the attention of the younger generation, because the younger generation, they are already really exposed to different kinds of lifestyles within China or outside, and they are very much interested in always experiencing something new. So there's a demand for this new experience, and that's why there's always creativity happening for them.
Thank you very much. I would like to now move on to Wang Junfeng, and we were talking about the need to have more creativity for the younger people, and that's exactly what you do. I mean, you're dealing with an exquisitely contemporary situation. Do you want to show us some of your work, please?
Yeah, sure. Okay. So I'm gonna point to that way. Okay. So, thank you so much. My name is Junfeng Wang, and I'm the co-founder of MeBest. So MeBest is a startup company. We design and renovate spaces, and then renovate them into urban sharing living room for all kinds of events use. So we are not like a very traditional design company, but we actually not only design but also operate the spaces. The space that we're creating, actually, we call them the fourth space. So the first space is home, where we live, right? And the second space is office, where you work. And the third space is Starbucks. Starbucks call themselves the third space. I don't want to argue with that. So we call ourselves the fourth space, which means it's actually it's private public space. So it's public. It can be shared by everyone in the city, but when you or your group are using it, it belongs to you only. So that's our idea. So we've been doing this for like 3 years, and you can see the map here. We've already created like 40 spaces in the city center of Shanghai, and we've already accommodated like over 3,000 events. So these are some of the spaces that we created. Some of them are located in the historical building, and some of them are in the office building, some of them in the commercial buildings, whatever. So we actually collaborating with lots of property owners and developers, and turn those like undervalued space or those spaces that is inefficiently used, turn them into public events use space, and then creating like more value for the space actually. So these are some of our space that were created. But I think as an architect, people using the space is more important than the space itself. So basically, we are more targeting on the purpose of how people using the space. I mean, because of the internet, because of the informational technology, people now are more and more kind of gathering together based on different topics, interests, hobbies, identities. So we actually created lots of online relationship. And then when the group of people kind of, growing bigger, there's a kind of surging need for people together offline to strengthen their relationships. So they need a space actually. So that's some of the activities actually happening in our spaces. There's a really kind of wide range of it. Ranging from very small scale activities like birthday party, team buildings, meetings, but all the way to like branding events, pop-up store. So this is like a really kind of wide range of activities happening in our spaces. And this is like a kaleidoscope, how the lifestyle is going to carry out in the urban life. And we think ourselves are creating this kind of incubator, for all these communities to grow bigger and bigger. And then we trying to use our brand, trying to use the spaces to reveal the value of these communities. So that's basically what we're doing.
So I wanted to ask you, Junfeng, it's so interesting, and it seems very complex also to deal with this kind of, how many spaces do you have?
We have already like over 40 spaces.
40 spaces. So how do you program that? Are they laid over a series of WeChat groups? So is every space dedicated to a particular activity, or do they switch activities? Is it a membership model? How does it work?
I think our specialty is like our product can split into two parts. So one is the offline product, which is space itself. And the other one is the online product, which we have the platform to kind of collect the people, or to kind of connecting people who are, urgent to using the spaces. So they actually kind of reserve the spaces on our online platform, and then they use our space for different purposes. So when we design the offline product, which is the space itself, we really design a very flexible way. So it's either can be used by birthday party, or can be used by events like this, or can be used by conference, can be used by even some other or like pop-up stores. So the flexibility is really like a key element to accommodate different events to happen, so that more and more people can use them.
And who designs them? Because it has to be also a system design. It's not like interior decoration here.
Yeah, so basically from the beginning we actually design the space ourselves, because we trying to test the market. We want to know really how people want the space to be. So we design them by talking to people who are using space, and this is a really kind of product way of designing the space, not like very architectural way of designing space. And then when we got the key element, or when we got the standard, this is like a guidebook. And then we use the guidebook to collaborate with lots of architects and designers, and tell them what kind of criteria should be like a very key element to be implemented into the space. But the other parts, designer can design in their own way because the experiences of it is really important, it's different. Yeah.
Thank you very much. Now, our next up is Juan, who speaks perfect Italian. I mean, I have to say, it's very funny. I'm Italian, and 2 out of 5 in this panel speak Italian, which is so funny. We always say that there is a lot of closeness between Chinese culture and Italian culture, and that might be also a stereotype, but it's a stereotype that I embrace with abandon. And I'm glad that she does speak Italian. Juan is an architect and a professor in Hong Kong, and she has worked all over the world and also presented a lot of her work at various biennials and triennials. And would you mind showing us some of it, please?
Thank you, Paola. It's nice to be back in New York. Oh, that's not my slide. There. Oh, I see. This is a slide of Shenzhen. So I am a Chinese-American architect. I've been based in Hong Kong and Shenzhen for over a decade, where I've been researching into the Pearl River Delta and planning. So the challenge to me put Bandana was to present my work in 3 slides. So I put 3 slides together. I follow the rules, and they're at 3 different scales in which I work: at the scale of the city, at the scale of the building, and the scale of the human body. So first, the scale of the city. This is the city of Shenzhen. I'm glad you put this slide in. This is, if anyone has heard of Shenzhen, it's a modern city just north of the border in Hong Kong, and this is a very typical image of the city because it's often said Shenzhen, the city, was no history, and it was just kind of overnight city that grew from nothing in a period of 30 years. And that's true, but what is also true is what I have found, that the city actually is built upon a territory that has not only hundreds of years, but thousands of years in history. And that you can still see visible, for example, where I have circled in red, are sites of original historic villages that's been there for hundreds and sometimes in some cases over 1,000 years, that today are still active urban centers in the city. So just to give you a quick data, in Shenzhen today there's 20 million people. So 20 million a migrant population from an original population of 300,000. So out of the 20 million, 10,000 lives in these so-called urban villages, meaning the former historic villages that now have become so dense. So that means half of the city's population actually lives in unplanned informal settlements, which is something that people don't really talk about. So my work has been researching these settlements in China and learning both the top-down planning of Chinese cities, but also the very little discussed bottom-up and informal community and individual activities. So I research into them, I write about the villages in the city, and as an architect I also design. So this is, for example, turning a 100-year-old Hakka building that's in the middle of the city, an original village that's been abandoned for 40 years, and turning it into a community center, exhibition center for both the original villagers, the migrant workers, and the newest generations, which are these artists who has moved into the village, forming artistic space. So the idea is to use architecture to inject new life into the original space, but allow it to be a place where different populations and different history of people coming together. And finally, this slide is the work I've been doing in Hong Kong for the past 4 years. I call it Housing of Last Resort. And it comes from having researched into informality for nearly 2 decades and learning from it, learning the power of the flexible, the individual, and the mobile and flexible, and wanting to apply that. So this is also a type of informal housing in Hong Kong, where you see the top left image. Very often there are these housing that people live 3 generations, maybe 5, 6 people living in 50 square feet. So it's this incredible hyperdensity. So what we did is at first we researched and drew everything that was in the room, which is essentially their entire world. So not only the walls and furniture, but every object they own. And then we go through a process, the middle row, a process what we call co-design, where we meet with the residents, we meet with the children, we teach them the ideas of how to improve their life, and then we actually make insertions, interventions into the space using the latest architecture technology of the offer, using robotic CNC cut pieces that we can duplicate later. We use VR to be able to communicate to people who can't understand models. And the idea then is to be able to teach them. So what you can see is all the pieces we have designed on the lower hand. They're using the type of joints they have is easy to assemble and disassemble. That's because this population often faces eviction. So the idea is that whatever we put in, we want to make sure they love it, and we also want to make sure that they have the power themselves to disassemble it and move it with them when they're forced to be evicted, or hopefully to finally get into the public housing system in Hong Kong, which currently the waiting list is 10 years. So the idea is for us to be able to use both kind of intellectual knowledge, academic research, but also design skills and design technology to be able to really bring design and technology to, I would say, 90% of the population that often do not receive the services of architects. And after kind of 10, 15 years of working in China, in the PRD, working with these families, I really believe that this is something I would like to advocate all of us to try to do more. Thank you.
No, thank you. Absolutely. So, Shenzhen and Hong Kong, it's hard to think of more different urban realities, right? And of course, also the kind of extreme architecture that is present in both. And I truly admire what you're doing in Hong Kong, but I was also wondering, Shenzhen being a city that exploded in such a short time, who did the urban plan for Shenzhen?
The urban plan for Shenzhen was, there's been different iterations of the urban plan. So they were done by the China Planning Institute out of Beijing originally, and the second generation urban planning was done by then Shenzhen-based China Planning Institute. That's
and was it based on the villages?
It was not intentionally based on the villages. It was when the government went to this countryside, said, okay, we now need to build a brand new modern city for China. This is 1979, where there's no models that exist. And in 1979, unlike today, China was very poor. I think anyone over 40 probably remember that. And they didn't have money to actually buy all the lands from the original villagers. They only had enough money to piecemeally buy the farming land. But they could not compensate them for their homes and could not build housing for them. So which is why this strange master plan happened, that this very top-down, quite brutal in my opinion, top-down planning, but it kind of made these reservations of the existing 2,000 villages. So these 2,000 villages were not, essentially they were denied urban citizenship and they were denied urban infrastructure. So they had to fend for themselves. So without land to farm, they started to build buildings and start renting out their buildings to migrant workers who were arriving by the thousands every month. And the city couldn't build housing fast enough. So what is really interesting about Shenzhen is that it is both a master planned city, but it's superimposed onto a bottom-up, completely kind of accidental urbanism. So it's this really interesting hybrid between top-down and bottom-up that has been quite inspirational in some ways for me to be able to witness, because we tend to think the bottom-up and the informal are very small scale, they're localized, but in this case, the speed at which Shenzhen urbanized and developed and became wealthy and became imbued with technology would not have been possible without these pre-existing historic sites that became very active participants in the urbanization and economic development of the city.
So the layering of historical and present, of formal and informal, top and bottom is really important, and it's something we can truly learn. So I would like now to move on to Yichen, who's also very interested in the fabric of a city, which is the community. You've done buildings of all kinds, but in particular, you were telling us about the school that you designed that is really riveting. So let's move on to your work, Yichen.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is my pleasure to be here to have a short introduction about our work. My name is Yichen and I founded my own practice in New York at 2012 after working with Frank Gehry and Stephen Hall for a number of years. So being able to practice in New York provides me a very unique opportunity to observe and understand about China from a very different perspective. So my practice is mainly focused on the culture and the education project. And most of my project was in Shenzhen in the first 5 years. So as Du Juan mentioned, Shenzhen is a very special city. It's a very young city, only with about 30 years history, and near Hong Kong. So the city, after working a project in Shenzhen, I realized the city grows up so fast that I have to quickly adjust my design strategy to adopt its changes. So here is one of the project as an example. It's a 550,000 square feet school in the downtown of the Nanshan district of Shenzhen. There's about 3,000 teachers and students going to study and living there. This is the map. The black part is the very traditional type of the community called village in city, which Du Juan also mentioned. There was much more village in city in the Nanshan district, but these are the only piece left after a number of years of the larger scale urbanization and the larger scale of the city development. So our site is really located in downtown area. So the photo above where you can see is the photo we took at 2010. And what's happened right now after 9 years was something like this. So you will find that there is a dramatic city scale and the city fabrication changing in these 9 years. So on the left side is the site of our school at 2012. On the right side is 2009. You can find during these 7 years, our site was surrounded by a larger amount of the high-rise residential towers. The city brings so many of the larger amount of the high-rise skyscraper with the larger amount of the FAR. And our site became sort of like an island surrounded by a reinforced concrete forest. So what we can do for our site, basically you can see the dot line is our site. So what we can do for this school, instead of creating high-rise schools, isolating students from the outside world, we create more intimate connection to the community. The main part of the school, there is only 3 floors. So the students, whenever on which grade, they can easily get down to the stair to talk with the teacher and to meet with the nature. So from the aerial view, you will find the school like a piece of water meanders in the community and fusing into the surrounding. So here is a photo. Here is a photo from the garden of the elementary school with the cityscape as a background. We also plant many of the trees to growing up together with the students. So I grew up from Lilong in Shanghai, which is a very traditional type of the community with very high density. I also attend a community elementary school in Shanghai, which is strongly, tightly interconnected with the society and with the city. So from your apartment, you can easily hear the loud reading of the students from the school, and in the school you can hear the grandma yelling to get their grandchildren back home for dinner. So it was a very great memory, but all of them are lost in the past few years. So go back to today's topic about the future new design, the new city. In my opinion, there is too many new, so-called new in China right now. In my opinion, instead of new and fast, I prefer more go back to the traditional volume, which is old and slow. So
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
It's very interesting because in the past, architecture was supposed to propel people versus the future, towards the future, and instead you're using architecture to bring back a sense of scale that has been lost because of the expansion of the city.
Yeah, that's what we want to do. So thanks for this panel, they only allow us to present 3 pages or 5 pages. So I do think about what we exactly do during the past 7 years of the practice. I think one of the very important concepts for us is bringing those kind of real people's life back to the community. Is our solution to deal with the ongoing urbanization problem of China.
Is it easy for you to sell this concept to developers and to planners, city planners?
Yeah, architecture is really about the common sense. So actually the developer and the city, they love this school a lot. Because at the end I get the reason is from the city part, the city government, they think we doesn't do a school, we make a big piece of the green space. For the developer, because the school is low-rise building, and it's already avoid those kind of the view from the residential tower to see each other. So actually, it's a common sense. Everyone like it.
Thank you very much. And last but not least, Jang Ruoyi. Ruoyi founded Chop Suey, which is a shop in Chinatown here in New York City, and she brought to New York some of the most interesting and most avant-garde design from China. So Ruoyi is going to tell us about the store and also about the kind of design that she sources for us. Please.
Hello. Hi, my name is Ruoyi Zhang. I have a store in the Lower East Side, sort of on the cusp of the Lower East Side and Chinatown, literally on the corner of Hester and Orchard Street, called Chop Suey Club. And this, let's see the store. Today I'm only going to show you the home decor section and the dollar store section of our store. So Chop Suey Club primarily sells contemporary Chinese designers items, Chinese designer art. So we sort of source some of our favorite designs from China. A lot of our designers are from mainland China. We also work with designers in Taiwan, Hong Kong, and a lot of them reside in Europe, and some of them live in the US. A lot of them are local. So the idea is that we deal with design on a very different scale compared to the architects here. We sort of deal with the design, particularly lifestyle objects that lives inside of the architecture. Because for us, it's important for us for people to access these lifestyle objects, to have more accessible ways to interact with Chinese culture, and this sort of is our goal. We're trying to make contemporary Chinese culture our focus, hoping that people will be able to learn a little bit more about Chinese culture and people through these just lifestyle objects. Because I think every time you invite a lifestyle object into your home, for example a teapot, you're learning about this culture, you're accepting it, you're interacting with it, and eventually you're going to learn something about this. So this is our home decor section. The blanket on the left, which is sold out already, is made by this textile designer in London. Her name is Jang. She's also a jewelry designer. Her jewelries are all textile based. She has this fascinating technique to create jewelries and also these home decor items. And the stool in the middle is a paper stool. It can fold up to be a book size. I picked this for New York living, basically, and a lot of the people in our neighborhood actually bought them for dinner parties and stuff. So it's like a interesting little product to have. And then some porcelain items. The teapot in the bottom is from Taiwan. It's a Taiwanese design studio. It's designed as a single-person teapot. So the lid is the cup, and then you can brew maybe 3 cups out of this teapot. And yeah, the idea, it actually comes in 3 different materials. And the idea is that we pair different types of tea with different material vessel to truly maximize the quality of the tea. This is something that only, I would say, a tea connoisseur would really care for. For general people, even like me, I just put the tea inside and then put water in. That's pretty much how I drink tea day to day. But for people who have a higher standard of living, this is how you're supposed to do it. And I think certain design studios, they paid attention to this aspect of tea drinking, which made this product more interesting for us. And the drum next to it is called Kong drum. It's a steel drum, essentially. It's designed by 2 Chinese sculptors. And because they designed this because originally they wanted to get the hand pan, and that's at like about 6,000 euros, and you have to wait for about half a year to get your hands on one. So they were like, we're gonna make our own. So they made this steel drum, and this particular drum has a pentatonic scale, which is a Chinese scale. It has an uprising kind of a sound to it. It's designed to level musicianship, so you don't, although it is an instrument, you play it according to your intuition. The idea is that you trust yourself that you can do no wrong, and that's how it relaxes you. And this, to me, represents a really important aspect of Chinese philosophy in terms of living, and this is what we want to bring to the US. And as for the lamp, it's mostly, aesthetics and just a cool lamp to have. So this is our home decor section. We're trying to create a sort of a new Chinese aesthetics, which I think in terms of interior design and stuff hasn't been explored fully or to the extent that we think it deserves. And this is my favorite part in our store called the dollar store. You can find a lot of the items in our pop-ups at the corner. This is a section that is a mixture of knickknacks that we imported and also curios we find in and around Chinatown. It's a representation of our neighborhood, basically. We want to pay homage to all the dollar stores and general stores in the area. So this is what we did, and it's sort of like a curating kind of process because
you're using a Bowery table, right? A classical Bowery kitchen.
Yeah. The kitchen supplies, we're surrounded by kitchen supply stores. We're surrounded by all these dollar stores that sell these, cheap items, basically. But even within these cheap items, we're able to find some real gems. And by that, I don't mean like antiques or anything. I mean by mass produced, like those fly swatters and stuff. But I think the thing is not because, to me, it represents an issue of China. It's not because we only produce cheap products or this is what China does. It's because we need, it just needs a little better curation. You need someone to show you how to look at certain things. I think Chinese products also suffer certain problems like lack of branding, that which made the product seem a little cheaper. But anyhow, this is our sections, my favorite section. It gives us a lot of flexibility to showcase ideas and elements that we want to push out, and that's just fun. So yeah, this is pretty much what we do. If you got a chance, you should come take a visit.
That's great, Ruoyi. So I'm gonna ask you first a question that I want to ask everyone. We were talking about stereotypes and then prototypes and archetypes, but if you were to get rid of one stereotype about Chinese design? Is there something that you want to stop people, you want to erase from Chinese design, and instead is there something that you would like the world to know about Chinese design? So something you want, a cliche you want to get rid of, and a secret you want people to know.
What I notice about Chinese design these days is that Chinese people, I think it's because of the low cost production. Chinese designers are able to design really experimental stuff for a lot cheaper than what designers abroad would have been able to do, and we have the ability to communicate a little bit easier. So like when I see our fashion designers like eyewear and jewelry, you can see a lot more really crazier ideas or products being made that designers here or in Europe might not be able to create.
So you would like to see more of that here?
I would say, my point is actually that these days people think that a lot of Chinese designer copy or you know, we still have that reputation going on. But the truth is there have been a lot more knockoffs of Chinese designs than you think. And,
I agree. That's a great point. I went to Shanghai Fashion Week. I was blown away. So thank you. Yichen, you.
So same questions?
Yeah, same question. Cliche you would like to get rid of?
I think that, you know, it's very important for 5 of us or 6 of us are sitting on this stage, and we saw those lanterns. The place called China Institute, but this is the downtown area of New York, next to the Wall Street. So that's what exactly the reality of the world. So I don't think that there's a big difference between the Chinese design and the rest of the world, the design from the rest of the world. Give an example. When I first come into this space, I look at the people sitting here, I was like, oh my God, this is a China Institute, because everyone is sitting on a Ming Dynasty chair, because I see the part of the chair. But when the people stand up, I realize, okay, that's a Hans Wagner chair, right? Both of them are made up of wood, but both of them are good design. People, if you know about Chinese furniture history, the Ming Dynasty chair, they are sharing a very similar philosopher and the detail quality with the Danish chair, with Hans Wagner's chair, with Herman Miller, like American, like Eames Ray chair. I think that this is a good design. For me, there is no Chinese design at all.
Right, that's important to know.
Only good design.
There's only good design. I like that. Okay, Yichen, how about you?
Perhaps I would try to demystify something that's related to what I was presenting earlier about Chinese cities, like a little bit different scale. So I grew up in the U.S. and I've been working in China, around Asia for 20 years, and something I learned over kind of more than a decade that I like to communicate to our audience here is that there's such a high degree of complexity and multi-layeredness to China first, to Chinese designs second, and sometimes related to what I'm saying, the Chinese cities. There is this perception, especially in the US, that China is entirely central plan, top-down control, and very much a linear process of decision-making, and that's not the case because of many reasons. One is because China in the past 40 years urbanized so quickly, you simply couldn't regulate everything, unlike New York. So a lot of the inventiveness wasn't actually intentional. It came out of necessity, it came out of gray areas. And the same for Chinese cities in per se, is what we see, you know, the achievement, let's say, the economic achievement we see, the technological achievement we see, has been quite attributed almost singularly to centralized decision making and centralized planning and centralized powers, let's say. And this is simply not true, because a lot of what we have seen in the world that's come out of China, whether it's in urbanization, in technology, in economics, it really came from bottom up. It came from individuals that not only did they not follow what they were told to do, they went against what they were told to do. And this is where the inventions have come from.
Thank you. Thank you. And Junfeng, please.
I think instead of talking about cliche or like a more traditional side of China, I think young generation designers in China are more willing to talk about a more like a modernized China. In terms of the technological advance or the change of lifestyle. So I think to be like to achieve a better design, you should have like a better understanding of new lifestyle in China. Because of the technology, because of the information technology in China, like Alibaba, Tencent, they have achieved a lot in technology. So people really. By using the technology, their lifestyle has changed a lot. I mean, compared to China in 1990s or 1980s, it's like a huge leap, actually. And in some part, actually, the technology is already in China is already kind of leading forward in the international side. So I think my exciting part is our design or our practice is really kind of joining in the reconstruction of the lifestyle in China. And we are actually kind of creating this kind of container for the new lifestyle to happening. And then we are able to create this kind of incubator, for the new activities or new lifestyle kind of, forming in the city. So that's basically the more exciting part that we are doing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think this question is really important, and it's a facet of an everlasting battle between universalism and regionalism. So was the case in the field of architecture. For example, in the early 20th century, you have the modernism. But when every region starts to embrace modernism, then you have these cities that look so similar to each other, and then they lost their own identities. And then people from different regions and civilization, they start to rethink what their local identity is and start to embrace architecture in a different way. I think in China nowadays, there is a very interesting concept of guoqiao, namely it's national fashion, just literally translating it, but basically means sort of having the characteristics of a more globalized aesthetics or approach towards design, but also having this another layer of the local identity. I think in China nowadays, it's actually a threshold in the history where people are starting to embrace back again to its own identity, but with this perspective of global influence. For example, nowadays you still see these letters, but I imagine, for example, for Noguchi, he was able to still keep this sort of Eastern Oriental aesthetics, but transforming it in a much more abstract way that is very much welcomed anywhere in the world.
I wonder if he would be accused of appropriation today. It's a different moment, but no, everything that you said here is very close to my heart. The complexity, the nuances, the avant-garde nature that we don't know, and everything requires really a dive. As a curator of contemporary architecture and design, my biggest frustration with myself is that I don't speak and understand Mandarin, which is something that I will fix sooner rather than later. We've only scratched the surface of this panel today because I feel that we could have had so much more to discuss. For instance, just what Chinese architecture, architects and designers can teach us, and urban planners, about the environmental concerns when designing cities and when designing buildings. So really this is just the beginning. But as we said today while we were preparing for the panel, we wanted to meet, and also we wanted you to meet, these great designers and architects so that you can go home and study their work and start digging deeper into the amazingly complex and wonderful reality that is contemporary Chinese architecture and design. I want to really thank Dorinda Elliott for inviting us here. I want to thank you panelists because you've been fabulous, and thank you all for joining us here today. So, thank you.
Wow, again, that was just so incredible. These people are not just designers and architects, they're humanists, they're philosophers, they're literally building a new society from the grassroots up. So we are so thrilled to have a chance to talk to all of you. And Paola, you just brought it all together because you're such a global thinker and a visionary in your own right. So thank you so, so much. This is our last panel of the day, and you probably started smelling some of the wonderful fragrances wafting through the room, and you've seen that some people have started, taking advantage of that and eating some delicious food. So that's what's coming next, is our food festival. We're so grateful to all of our brilliant panelists today. We hope, most of all, that you'll all take away from these conversations, just as Paola was just saying, a new understanding of some of the grassroots innovation and creativity that's being driven by a new generation in China, represented right here and by all the speakers of today. So now we hope you'll eat, drink, shop, and have fun. We're going to have music and stay because, top secret, Wuhan Phoenix is in the room, and he is going to perform within the next half hour, so don't leave, okay? We're going to have some hip-hop as well. Thank you.